This is an exercise or a research tool or a brainstorming tool that you can use to discover or identify other looks that are suited to you that you currently do not utilize in your day-to-day life. Okay? The basic idea here is that despite the fact that you are unique, there are many, many, many people alive at this time. There's 9 billion people alive on the earth at this time. Many of those people share genetic similarities to yourself. Okay, they look like you. That's the fact of it. So we would call that the genotype. But within everyone's unique cultural choices arises a different person. Okay, so even though that you may genetically look like another person, stylistically or from a personality perspective, you're very different. Okay, so you're an actor and you will be called upon to play roles, people who are not like you, except in the way that you look in some fundamental genetic way. Okay, so we're going to use this tool. I call it the Doppelganger Compass. And the reason I call it a Doppelganger Compass is because it's a catchy name, and I needed to call it something. Okay, so this is the style and status Doppelganger Compass. All right, so you should have the diagram in front of you. All right, blank worksheet, and you should have some small normal photo of yourself, kind of like you in street clothes. Maybe it was you before you moved to Hollywood, and started thinking about being an actor. Maybe it's you before you even enrolled in acting school. Just a general picture of you, the normal you, possibly how your family thinks of you. Just a generic photo of you. That goes in the middle of the compass. Okay, so once you have that image in your mind or on the worksheet, what you're going to do is imagine the same you, maybe in your hometown, or maybe it's a public figure that you're aware of, who's a lot like you, but who is a much higher status version of you. Like maybe you came from a suburban middle class background. This person might have been born into wealth. Like maybe it's a member of the royal family in Sweden or in Britain or Norway or somewhere like that. But they're a high status person. Maybe they're very wealthy, or maybe they're just part of a high status organization. But the idea is that they are the version of you that is very high status. Okay? So you can go out on the internet and you can do visual research. Okay? You're going to find pictures of people who look a lot like you, but who are very high status. Okay? And you're going to scrapbook these images, because those people, you could conceive of them as being high status doppelgangers of yourself. Okay? And now conversely, you could think of your hometown. Again, let's say you have a suburban middle class background. Think of the people in your hometown who were very low status but looked like you. Maybe they lived in a trailer park, they didn't have a lot of money. Maybe they struggled at school. I don't know. Like in my hometown, there were many, many people whose families were quite different from mine. We all lived in the same town. They were much lower status. Okay? Might be blue-collar families, or families that are where the parents are divorced and they're struggling. But the idea is there is a version of you out there in the world who is much lower status than you. I mean, just by being by virtue of being an actor, You are living kind of a dual life. You have your foundational life where you're pursuing a practical and meaningful subsistence, and at the same time you're pursuing an artistic endeavor. Right away, that's like one more thing than most people are pursuing, or many people are pursuing. So the idea here is there are low status versions of you in North America. There are many, many, many low status versions of you in North America living parallel lives. They're like your low status doppelganger. And what you want to do is identify these people. It could be like someone who is subject of a criminal investigation, that is currently in the public eye because they're being accused of a crime. That could be a low status version of you. They don't have to look exactly like you, because you're going to see that with all of these choices or lifestyles, there are visual identifiers which more or less tag the person as being one way or another, primarily based on status, but you can see when you explore the other dimensions of the compass that life choices or personality also come into play. Okay, so on the Doppelganger Compass, we have the north and south represent an axis related to status. So the farther north that you go, the higher status is the person. And the farther south you go, the lower status you go. Okay, and the idea is status all by itself exists on a continuum or a spectrum. There's no such thing as an absolute scale. And you can be a higher status version of yourself, slightly higher status, a lot. You know what I mean? The status can go up and up and up and up, and can also go down. There's almost no limit. It's like a spectrum that a person can explore, or at the very least be aware of. And on the left to right axis, or the west to east, east to west, we're going to talk about conservative versus risk. So on the eastern side, we would have personality types that are very conservative. They're very conforming to societal norms and choosing very safe lives, or perceiving that they're making safe choices. Doesn't mean everything is going to work out great for them. It just means they're going to make conservative, safe choices. And again, going in that direction, you could have people who are generally safe in their approach to life, and then you could have people who are very, very extreme in their pursuit of safety. That might include people like doomsday prep people who are so concerned about the future that they build an underground bunker and they stock it filled with food. You see what I mean? It's a continuum that has to do with choices. And on the west direction, we have people who live more risky, liberal, artistic lives. Their choices are less safe and more avant-garde. And again, that's a spectrum of people. It's not just that there's a line in the sand and once you cross over it, you're considered risky. We're talking about a continuum of experience, or a spectrum of personality types. Okay, so the reason that I've designed this Doppelganger Compass is to illustrate a very important point about casting. And that is, in the center of this compass, it's crowded. It's filled with people. And there are very few roles, okay? And also, this is where the celebrities and the names are crowded. And because of this, it is very difficult to secure good casting opportunities in this central region. All of the good jobs, all of the big jobs, all of the exciting jobs lie on the outliers of this grid or compass in the high status direction. In other words, heightened or exaggerated versions of yourself. This is the most important thing that you need to understand about casting. Is the average person is not going to be called upon very frequently when they don't have credits, because there's always someone who looks that way who already has the credits that they want, okay? And when you go more into extremes of this style and status compass or map, that's where all the interesting roles are, and that's where fewer and fewer actors visually reside. Okay, so that's a general description of how to use the Doppelganger Compass. The idea here is that you're just going to visually explore, possibly in your mind's eye, all of the extremes of the looks that you potentially could have had you lived a very different life. What would have happened if you had been born with so much money that you could have lived in Monte Carlo your entire life, or maybe bought an island? You would dress differently. You would act differently. You would probably cut your hair differently. And that's a high status version of you, and you should have a photo for that. And you should explore looks that are in that area, you know, especially if you have a preference for playing high status characters. And then conversely, there's someone out there like you, or maybe you had been born into a different situation, and you didn't have much money. Maybe your family struggled. Maybe you got involved with drugs when you were younger, or got pregnant, or just who knows. I mean, we all know these stories. They're written about in the crime procedurals. But the idea is there's a person who looks like you who is leading a very low status life. I mean, here in Vancouver, there's a neighborhood called East Hastings where most of the drug activity is. And if you walk down East Hastings, you see many different kinds of faces, but they're all decrepit, right? Everyone's life is in shambles. A lot of them are dirty. It's decrepit. But those faces are the faces of just normal people whose lives have taken a turn for the worst. And the idea here is that those people are written about on television. They write stories that include low-status characters, and if you want to play those characters on television, you need to communicate to the casting office that you're capable of playing those characters by having the look or a look, okay, which would really mean a photo, a grounded, realistic photo showing that you can match the tone of that role. Okay, so this is a research tool primarily to guide your search for scrapbook images. Once you have scrapbook images illustrating different types of people that you could potentially play, and you can see their wardrobe, you can see their hair, you can see how they dress, what kind of glasses they wear, now you have the basis for putting together a look. Because a look is usually a person who is not you. Or maybe it's a secret version of you that you don't like to talk about, or you're afraid to talk about. Or it could be a past life that you had. I used to be a rock musician when I was younger, so that might be a look that I could adopt at some point. All right, so enough about the compass directions, because I think that is a very easy thing to understand, and this is really just a way to organize your quest for imagery. Okay, it's an organizational tool, help you organize your thoughts and do your research. The other thing that we can observe about the style and status doppelganger compass is that it takes place or is rooted in a particular time period. Okay, so once you have exhaustively researched high and low status versions of yourself and conservative and risky versions of yourself, and you've gathered all those pictures of your alternate, doppelganger selves, you can think about the future. What if we lived 300 years in the future? Okay, probably your normal version of yourself would look quite different in 300 years. And then in 300 years, we would have the high status version of you and the low status version of you, and then the conservative version of you and the risky version of you. Does that make sense? So we're talking about imagined worlds, like Westworld or Altered Carbon, Battlestar Galactica. It could be dystopic in the sense that everyone is in sort of a bad spot, or maybe it could be a class battle, like the Matt Damon movie, where there's a space station where all of the rich people live in comfort, and then all the poor people are on the surface of the planet. But the idea is these stories are being written and rewritten, and when they're cast, they're going to use types that fit these archetypes, okay? So the idea here is you can take this doppelganger compass exercise. You can first do it in the present day, set in the present day. And then once you have it done for the present day and you've scrapbooked all those images, you can also move it into the future, 200 years from now. You know, future fiction, a future reality, Star Wars, Star Trek, that kind of thing. And then you could also move it into the past. You could move it into the distant past or the recent past. For example, you could, in the 1970s, when the hippie movement was kind of in full swing, people had long hair, they wore bell bottoms, and a lot of corduroy and a lot of orange. It was kind of post-psychedelic, and it's before the cocaine era, so it was mostly weed and LSD and things like that were pop culture drugs. But there was also things like disco and other things happening in the 1970s. And the idea here is, in the 1970s, there was a version of you that was just average. And then there was the version of you who was super conservative. And then there was a version of you who was a hippie, who grew their hair long and smoked drugs all the time. You see what I mean? So the idea here, in every era, you can use the doppelganger compass to explore different versions of yourself in that period. And then from that, you can scrapbook images that match those archetypes. And then you can start putting together looks, or a look where you can get into some of these more interesting aspects of humanity and get out of that central cluttered area where there's just hundreds and hundreds of unknown generic faces which don't match specific character archetypes, because that's what breakdowns are. Character breakdowns that are described on the casting sites contain specific information that describes specific people with specific personality traits. And when casting directors look to cast those roles, they are looking to find the specific types of people who match the character description. And if you don't match it, you're not going to be cast. And so the way to get the attention of a casting director is to become more specific, because that's what they need. They need specific faces to fit specific roles. They don't need general actors for specific roles. They're looking for specific kinds of people that match specific character descriptions that are described in the breakdowns. And that is my blah 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 lecture to myself in my home office.